Shane Russell, the son of Lance Russell? No jokes for me. They're the best. Memphis, baby. On the Outdated Wrestling Hour. Hi, everybody. This is Bob Smith, and welcome back to the Outdated Wrestling Hour. I used to be with Pro Wrestling Illustrated magazine back when Methuselah was a young boy, but now I host this podcast into its second year. And this is one of my high water marks. We have the son of Lance Russell, the legendary Memphis wrestling announcer. His name is Shane Russell, and a boy is a chip off the old block. He's got great stories and great memories of Lance. This is one you're not going to want to miss. I know he's been making the rounds on a lot of podcasts, but you know what? It never gets old. This guy never gets old. He tells great stories and has unbelievable memories. So we're going to talk for about an hour, and we hope you enjoy it. I want to talk about something personally just for a second here. I have an injury right now that I'm nursing. I have a problem, and it may cause me to lose an occasional show coming up in the next several weeks. I don't know that yet. I don't know if I'm going to need surgery or not, but I've been hurting for a long time. So I got to attend to this, I just have to. I've been crazy to live with it for as long as I have, better part of a year. So I'm going to check into this, and it's nothing life-threatening. Don't worry about that, but it is really, really painful. So this is my main concern right now, is just getting better and getting back to my normal self. So I'm going to do that. And if there's any changes in the schedule, I will let you know. I'm going to have a buffer show coming up at the end of the month. Maybe the first week in July, I may not have a show or something like that, but I'll let you know ahead of time. But everything's fine other than that. Podcast is doing great. You people are the best. And we're going to get Mr. Shane Russell on presently, right after this word, and we will be right back. Don't go nowhere. We're going to Memphis, baby. In the meantime.
This is Joe Walsh. One thing I do when I'm not playing rock and roll is get on the air as an amateur radio operator. Also called ham radio, is a communication service provided by ordinary people just like you and me. We have a national emergency communication system in place 24/7, 365. Find out more about amateur radio at arrl.org/whatishamradio. See you on the air.
I use this expression a lot in this podcast. I feel like a kid in a candy store. Why? I have the son of one of the great legends of Memphis wrestling, and every bit as good as a human being, Lance Russell. His son is Shane Russell, and he's on my show. Shane, welcome.
Yellow again, everybody. Shane Russell and Bob Smith, all ready to go for another big day of championship wrestling. Bob, thank you so much for having me, guy. I got to tell you, I start all my shows off like that, and in reverence to my dad. He started that off every single Saturday morning at 11 o'clock with Yellow again, everybody, and did it for 40 years.
You're going to have me calling you Lance, you get me confused. No, that is exactly what he used to say. I'll tell you a little story, just break the ice here.
Sure.
I met Lance for the first time with Bill Apter. I don't know. You know Bill. You must know Bill.
I've met him. I don't know him personally.
Yeah, but everybody's met him. I'll put it that way. Gregarious guy, great guy, wonderful human being. And I'm meeting Lance for the first time, and I'm like, oh my gosh, Lance Russell. Now, Bill loves to tell jokes, right?
Right.
Oh, jokes here, jokes there. But he knew in the office I did an imitation of Lance Russell. Oh. For guys who hadn't heard Lance, because I was we were getting the tapes from Memphis. I used to watch every one of them, and I just absorbed every show, and I loved it. And I love Lance, so so Bill goes to Lance. Bob does a great imitation. You, Bob, do the imitation for Lance. I went, oh no, no, don't make me do this, Bill. No, you're do. So I go 12-22, rough and ready, get the Duke, and I'm like, and Lance went, that's pretty good. And I went, oh, thank you so much. Because, but Bill was like that. Bill, tell a joke to Jim Cornette, he would say. I can't tell a joke to Jim Cornette. He's the funniest guy on the planet. How you do that, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, I am proud to got to meet Lance on 2 occasions. And I'm also a veteran. I was on the Channel 5 show, unfortunately, after he had left to be on the NWA. But nobody in the history of wrestling, my friend, I know this as well as any, you should know it better than anybody, had an impact on the fans of a territory than Lance Russell. Nobody was ever a better communicator to his audience than that man. That's my opinion, and it was also the greatest wrestling show in the history of TV. I'm not blowing smoke. I've said this a million times on the show. So thank you, and thank Lance.
Well, thank you for the compliment. The one thing that everybody says about Dad, and his years of doing the wrestling program, they had the talent come and go. Jerry Lawler, Bill Dundee, the Rock and Roll Express, the Fabulous Ones, everybody came and went. But the one constant throughout the 40 years was Lance Russell and Dave Brown on the mics. Mm-hmm. I think that's what kept the show going and kept it alive and really got the ratings that it deserved.
Well, you and I talked about this before we recorded. I used to refer to Lance, or I still did on the show, as the Vince Scully of wrestling. Vince Scully came into so many different people's lives, and the fans considered him a friend more than an announcer. I think it was the same way with Lance. There's something personal about his announcing style. He was talking directly to the viewer. He wasn't selling you something. He wasn't hyping anything. He was the most likable person ever to be a wrestling play-by-play guy. I really mean that.
You're exactly right, Bob. I tell you, I go from time to time. I get invited to go to a few Comic Cons or wrestling reunions, and I just went to one here recently in Evansville. And I had a table with some of Dad's old memorabilia there, and some shirts and banners. And the one thing that everybody would come up to me and say is that, Shane, she goes, your dad was the voice of my childhood. Mm-hmm. I can't tell you how many times I've heard it. And then they would go on to explain. They would say, it was like my grandfather just talking to me and telling me about what's going on TV. And I believe every word he said because it's my grandfather. So, yeah, Lance Russell and Dave Brown, they were just the constant and the greatest at doing what they did.
Absolutely agree. And I'm not saying to put anybody else down. I'm just saying from my sensibility. Well, look at it this way. I started with Pro Wrestling Illustrated around 1988, right? Yeah. And the WWF was Matilda the Bulldog and all these wild characters and 4-minute matches and a lot of color and flash. I grew up on a studio wrestling program myself. So when I started collecting wrestling tapes to cover Memphis.
Yeah.
I went, oh my gosh, this is the stuff, because it was that same intimate vibe, yet it seemed big time. And I think the biggest praise you can give a show like that is you got 250 people as an audience in a studio, but on Monday they'd fill the arena every week based on that show.
Yep, exactly right. And that was just what they did. I mean, it's the other unique thing, Bob, about that show was live.
Right.
I mean, it was live. There were no earpieces in Dad's ears or Dave's ears. I mean, they did it all on the cuff and things. A lot of things didn't go right, but boy, they made up for it and went right along with it. So, the one thing that I always like to let people know, the unique thing about my dad was his mix of TV experience and wrestling experience. He actually, Gordon and him would joke about it. Dad always would say, Gordon, how did you get the dean of wrestling announcers when I started a couple of years before you did and doing wrestling announcing? So, but Dad, he had a great mind for TV. he was program director for WHBQ TV, where the wrestling started. So he had the idea of putting the wrestling program at 11 o'clock on Saturday morning, because the only thing on TV at that time were cartoons for kids. And the ratings were just tremendous. I can't remember what they were. I mean, I'm going to say somewhere about an 80% rating on people watching that program at that time. But the other thing, Dad, he had just a creative mind. He came up with so many great programs. One that you probably don't know, but you've probably heard of him, Bill Dance, the fisherman.
Okay.
At that time, there were no live fishing shows on TV, and Dad had the great idea of saying, "Hey, why don't I get this guy and let's go out and we'll film him fishing and we'll put it on TV." Again, the rest is history from there. I mean, it just went great. So Dad had a great creative mind for TV, and he had the wrestling experience because he'd been doing it since 1956 or 57 when he started it. So yeah, he knew the wrestling and he knew TV. It was just a great mix.
Obviously so, yeah. How involved was he with channels 13 and 5 when he was doing the announcing? Was he a quasi producer of the show? I know he had more of a role than just being an announcer. He must have.
He did at WHBQ TV, that where originated. Well, it actually originated at WMC Channel 5 back in the early 60s. They moved it to Channel 13. But Dad was program director then, and he decided what went on TV at what time slots, everything. So he had a lot. Now, as far as the wrestling show, he had some say as to what went on. Dad was the announcer, though. That's what his job was, to get people to. He found Dave Brown. Dave Brown was a disc jockey, and he told Dave Brown, he said, "Dave, if you want to further your career, you really need to get into TV, and I got a great area, a great spot for you to be in." And that's going into being my co-host on the wrestling program. Dave said, "I don't know nothing about wrestling," but he learned quickly, and they both of them became great friends and great partners. When they moved over to WMC TV 5, didn't work for the TV station. He worked strictly for the wrestling company at that time. Jerry Jarrett realized after a week or two of not having Dad and Dave over there that they needed Dad pretty bad. So they lured him away from the TV station as a program director over there. To just come over and just be a wrestler, work strictly for the wrestling company and nothing else. And Dad, actually, he went out and not only did the announcing, but he would go to TV stations in each of the markets they went into and try to get new stations to take on the wrestling program. So because of his TV knowledge, he knew the program directors. He could explain to them what the ratings were and how lucrative it was for the stations. So it was a very successful marriage.
I know why it was successful too. Lance was a pure on gentleman, man. He had a dapper look. He always dressed so well, I thought. Right? Am I right? He always had a suit on. Maybe once in a while a polo shirt or something, but I never saw him without a suit. And I could see him going to other stations and impressing those people to pick up the show in syndication. I really do. I think he must have been the perfect man for that job.
You can imagine. I mean, if you walk into a TV station that's not carrying wrestling and you show them the ratings that they got in Memphis, I mean, that's probably an easy sell in most cases. But it's funny you mentioned his suits, Bob. In the early days, he did commercials for a local store in town called Baxter Suits, and so his dad is known for his Baxter suits that he would wear on TV.
He looked a sharp-looking guy. But here's another thing: we better emphasize this. At the height of Memphis wrestling, and this is documented, folks. We're not pulling these numbers from anywhere. They did 80% of the TVs in the region were tuned into Memphis wrestling, or 70 or 65 for years.
Right.
I don't think there's ever been a more successful television program on a local basis in the history of anything. If there is, I don't know about it.
Yeah, I couldn't tell you either. I mean, nobody. I mean, again, back in those days, you didn't have, in the early days, you didn't have cable and all that. You had 5 or 6 stations or whatever. But still, I mean, getting that share was just remarkable. And, and as I tell people, it wasn't just Dad and Dave. Jerry Jarrett was the brains behind the whole promotion. He was the promoter. He came up with everything. And then, of course, the talent that they had, Bob, Jerry Lawler, Bill Dundee, Tojo, the Fabulous Ones, Rock and Roll Express, and then all the guys that started out. I mean, you name the who's who on the Hall of Fame and the WWE, and they came through Memphis.
Hulk Hogan, yeah.
Rock, Ultimate Warrior, Sting, Undertaker, yes. Kurt Angle came through. I mean, everybody came through Memphis. So yeah, it was just that territory was known. I think, and you may correct me here, but I think the word was out that if you wanted to make it in the business, you needed to go to Memphis and let them show you the ropes.
When I was there in 91, Sabu and Rob Van Dam were raw rookies at that point.
Wow.
And I got to see them work, and it was like, boom, right after that, both of their careers exploded. The Sheik trained both of them. And it was like, but they cut their teeth in Memphis for a while. And I was there to see it.
Yeah.
And from people like that all the way to every major star you can think of, from Ric Flair to Hulk Hogan, you just go down the list. They all wrestled in Memphis. I can't think of anybody who didn't.
Yeah. Yeah. Rick Rude, King Kong Bundy, Jim Neidhart. I mean, again, the list just goes on. But again, I think it was that if you wanted to make it in the business, you needed to go through Memphis.
I think anybody who got their first, shall we say, push there, if you succeeded there, that made your career.
Right.
If you could go over in Memphis, go over, either they hated you so bad or they loved you in a big way, you were going to be a star the rest of your career. There's no question. Because Memphis fans are a great proving ground for that.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, they've had some of the greatest matches, of course, with packed houses, too. Mid-South Coliseum, I think it held right at 11,000 people. And they would pack that every Monday night. And, a couple of things, one thing about my dad that I sit back and I watch videos of him, Bob, on YouTube and watch how he did and the presence that he held. But he was without a doubt, in my belief, one of the best ad-libbers I've ever seen. I don't know if he's ever been at a loss for words. You can watch him in some of the early interviews with some of the green wrestlers, who are really trying to make it in the business. If you watch the early Hulk Hogan interview with Dad, and it was rough, but Dad just, he kept making it through. Bill Dundee was very green when he came over from Australia with George Barnes and walked him through, and he was just great at doing that. And if I'm ever talking too much, Bob, you let me know.
No way. Yeah. You couldn't talk too much for me. Like I say, I feel like a kid in a candy. This is great stuff.
For people who who haven't seen Memphis wrestling or who have seen Memphis wrestling and they've never seen the Tupelo concession stand brawl.
Right.
I tell you what, I think that's one of my dad's greatest works, along with the empty arena match with Terry Funk.
Right. Absolutely.
Dad on that Tupelo concession stand brawl, was doing the commentary on the match. They go, hey, we got to get out of here, and we'll hope to see you next week. While the match was still going on because they ran out of time, it goes black. And all of a sudden you can hear Dad say, Mike, hey, Mike, you need to grab the camera. Something's going on downstairs. Let's go down. I mean, it was just, I don't know if I'm sure he just came up with it, but it made everything believable.
Mm-hmm.
That's the thing. If he said it, you believed it.
Absolutely. You know what I think? I know what wrestling is, but when he was in those moments, he believed it too.
He did.
He wasn't fooling. He wasn't pulling the wool over anybody's eyes. He believed it too. When it was wrestling time, when that bell rang, he turned into an observer just like anybody else is. And what he said was from his heart. Nobody script his stuff. Nobody fed him lines through an earpiece.
Right.
It's so different now. But he was a real master at what he did. I mean, nobody could communicate to the fans better than he did.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, when he and Dave got into it, and he'd go out and do the interview with the guy, and then there's something would have to be going on. Dad, I mean, the thing about him too, he would get angry and disgusted at some of the heel moves, and people would just, if Lance was disgusted, I'm disgusted too. This is terrible.
Right. Right. Well, there's the thing. That's one of the things is missing in modern wrestling is the announcers. You could throw somebody off a balcony and they go, whoa, and not proclaim how awful that is. Right.
Right.
When Lance saw somebody foul somebody else, he'd get angry. And the best is when, let's say Eric Embry had a match, cheated to win in the ring, and he would come over to the table afterwards. And if he's gonna face Lance wrestle, Lance is going to give him a little bit of a tongue lash for what he just saw, and they don't do that anymore.
No, that's exactly right. And Dad did. I mean, there were a couple of times when it may have backfired on him because, one thing about Dad, and I'm not going to say this was 100% of the time, but he did not want Dave and him to know how the outcome was going to be. They knew the premise, what was going to happen. Basically, he didn't want to know how they were going to get there because they wanted that true reaction as to what, they wanted that to come across to the fans as this was the first time they're seeing it too, and describe it, that way. So I think that was really an edge that they had on it.
It's funny. It's really funny because I did for a short amount of time. I tried doing play-by-play for the earliest ECW, which was Eastern Championship Wrestling at that point. Todd Gordon and those guys.
Yeah,
and I did the same thing. I said, I don't want to know what's going to happen. I just want to react to it as I'm seeing it. I was terrible, but I had the same mindset that your dad did. Okay. So I tried it for a few times and I said, I didn't think it was any good. It was a personal thing. I just heard a replay and went, get somebody else. Yeah. But in any event, I find that fascinating that Lance and Dave felt the same way, that they wanted to react to it and see it unfold as opposed to know exactly what's going to happen or it did.
Yeah, exactly. It's funny you mentioned about you trying to, I tried my hand at commentating a couple of times and I didn't know anything that was going on. And I'm sure I know I did because I gave a lot of, oh my God, or wow, or something like that. Just really kind of unprofessional, but
I listened back to my tapes and you want to hear something funny? 30 years goes by, right? Since I did those tapes.
Yeah.
They end up, I am not, they came on a VHS tape, which I didn't know. Secondly, they showed them on the WWE network. So I was on the WWE network doing play-by-play. I knocked me down with a feather. Somebody wrote to me and told me. So I actually, I subscribed to WWE because I wasn't a subscriber at that point and watched the tapes. And you know what? My thing was, these guys were just hitting each other over the head with beer bottles. And I was like, oh man, I kept saying, oh man.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know why? Because that's what I felt. It was like, what are these guys doing? How violent ECW was.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I guess everybody has their catchphrases. If I was good, it would have been, oh man, because it was like every time they did something outrageous, that's what I would say. And I realized, oh my gosh.
Hey,
I didn't have it, man. I did not have it. The Lance was the standard, and I'm not even in the realm, Jack. I couldn't do it.
In watching those old tapes, Bob, did you have a favorite other than Jerry Lawler? I mean, did you? I know
his tapes.
Yeah.
Oh, I was a big fan of lots of them. I was fascinated by, of all people, Phil Hickerson.
Boy, what a tough guy he was.
A legitimate tough guy.
Yes.
And I liked him because he was the most unlikely looking guy to be a star in the territory, but he was for decades.
Yeah.
And then they made him P.Y. Chuhai at the end. And, it's just.
he had the old wrestler look, kind of a beer belly, husky, barrel chested kind of guy. And very similar to Joe LeDuc. I don't know if you remember Joe LeDuc or not.
Oh, everybody knows Joe LeDuc.
What a story Dad would tell on that. When do you remember when he came out and cut his arm?
Absolutely. It's one of the most viewed wrestling segments ever on YouTube.
You know, my dad being an old TV guy and back from the 60s, he did not like gratuitous blood and violence and all that. He just wasn't a real big fan of it. Definitely didn't like swearing or anything like that. But when my dad said, when he pulled out that axe and started sawing on his arm, you could see my dad's face and how he cringed.
Yeah.
He just did not like that, you know. So it was, boy, that was shocking to him.
But no, I had a lot of favorites, particularly during the time when I was working at the magazines. I really liked young Jeff Jarrett.
Yeah.
And you know what I was crazy about, of all people? Robert Fuller. Either as a heel or a face, he just had it.
He did.
He was totally believable. You know, you believed every word out of his mouth, whether he was with his Memphis Mafia rowdy guys or if he was teaming with he was tag team champions with Jeff Jarrett when I was there.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'll tell you, no, just a big, imposing man. I met him for the first time. But, oh my God! I'm looking up at him like this. I didn't realize he's so tall. He was a big drink of water.
Yeah.
So I was a fan. His Bill Dundee. There's never been anybody in the history of business who did more with less. But I mean that as the ultimate compliment. He was a major star and probably Lawler's greatest all-time opponent, I would think.
The feud between those guys are just legendary. I mean, I was just talking about this in Evansville. I think it was in 77. They had a feud going and they headlined the matches, I want to say, for 15 weeks in a row, every Monday night to a packed 11,000 seat arena.
Mm-hmm.
And they did everything from, of course, no DQs to the belt, loser leave town, to hair versus hair, to Bill Dundee's wife's hair. I mean, it was Bill Dundee's cattle. I mean, it was crazy everything they did. But could those two guys go in a ring, which I miss? I mean, I don't know how you feel about today's wrestling, but I'd love to see two guys in a ring going at it and doing it for a time period. I mean, Lawler, to me, I want to say the first one I saw him do it 3 or 4 times, go a full 60 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to say the first one maybe was with, it was either Harley or it was, the guy who won the belt from, it escapes my memory right now. Mr. Perfect.
Curt Hennig.
Curt Hennig, yes. It could have been with him, but 60 minutes in a match. I mean, when was the last time you saw that, or have you ever?
I haven't seen it since the early 90s.
Yeah. I mean,
and it was rare then. I mean, it was rare in the 60s. It was like rare at any time in wrestling. There weren't that many guys who had the stamina to go 60 minutes, particularly in an all-action match like Dundee and Lawler do.
Right.
It's impossible because they never let up. I mean, it wasn't headlocks and, scientific wrestling. These guys were at war.
Exactly right. And I go to some of the indie matches around my area and half the time they're out on the floor doing all crazy stuff or high flying off the top rope where guys are catching them, and I'm just an old fan of the old wrestling. I mean, I love wrestling. One of my all-time favorites, and my dad even said it was his all-time pure wrestler, was Lou Thez.
Okay.
And I don't know if you know Lou or...
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Sure.
I've got a picture that I have of Dad and Lou sitting at a table. Had to have been early 60s, probably 61, 62, somewhere in there. It's my favorite picture. I have a frame sitting in my office. So,
I want to ask you a question about you.
Sure.
You're the son of Lance Russell.
Uh-huh.
I'm assuming you went to school in the Memphis area as a kid and was part of the community. What was it like being the son of the guy everybody watched on TV every Saturday? It had to be either great or a pain in the neck sometimes. How did it go?
Did you just watch my speech I gave at Evansville for Jerry Lawler?
No, I haven't seen the speech yet. No.
I talked about it. It's it's kind of a celebration of Jerry Lawler, and I got up first, and I told everybody how I met Jerry, and how I hated Jerry Lawler. I couldn't stand him. He was, he was so disrespectful to my dad on TV. He even had the audacity to call him Banana Nose.
That's
and
right.
and so I said, Jerry Lawler, you made my life hell in school because my brother got the name William Lance, but I got the nose. And so I was known as Banana Nose Jr. all throughout my junior high and high school days. So, but nobody gave me any grief because they knew who my dad was. And they knew that if something didn't go right, I'd get Jerry Lawler or Jackie Fargo or somebody to come to have my back.
All right. You're in school. Okay.
Yeah.
You're in school. I don't care if it's high school or other school, right? Did you ever have friends or acquaintances walk up and go, that fake wrestling stuff?
Oh.
Or were they all just into it like you were?
No, most of it was all, hey, that's so fake. And, I can't believe, you watch that stuff. Yeah. I had a bunch of friends who watched it, but I had majority were more just, hey, that's fake. My dad says it's fake. Well, blah, blah, blah. And, my dad's famous line, he always told people when they'd say that, say, hey, look, for those who believe, no explanation is necessary. For those who don't, none will do. So,
that's right.
Yeah. So, it just goes with the territory.
It does. It does. I'll tell you what, a good wrestling match and a good story presented the right way, like they did on Memphis TV. I was on the show and they gave me a videotape of the show when I was at the studios.
Yeah.
And I come home and show my parents. I'm a full grown adult, but I went and visited my parents and they went, he shouldn't have done that to you. It's like they bought it.
Right.
They bought it. They bought another interview I did at another show in another territory. And it was like, I said, this is great. My own parents are Hornswoggle. This is wonderful. This is great stuff, because it's like, that's what kind of wrestling these days kind of rubs your nose in the fact that it's a show. This is why people like you and me, I'm sure, back when it was a secret society and you were glad it was a secret society because what? It had that suspension of disbelief and you could just fall into it, start to watch it and really get into it. Like two guys having a fight.
Right.
Right.
And most everything was called in the ring at that time too.
Right. Yeah.
There weren't rehearsals beforehand. Hey, we're going to do this. We're going to do that. I'm going to do this or whatever. It was called in the ring, typically by the heel, if I'm not mistaken. And it just made it great. One match, Bob, that, it's probably my top 5 is when Lawler and Idol went for hair versus hair in a cage match. Do you remember that?
This one I do not remember. Okay.
Unbelievable. Packed house, as always. Paul Heyman was Idol's man.
Wait a minute. It's funny. I didn't see the match. I was just reading about this. Now you ring a bell with me, and I saw the pictures from the aftermath, but go right ahead.
Yeah, but it was a great match, really in the ring in a cage match. Nobody can get in. There has to be a winner. Everybody's waiting to see who it's going to be. Will Lawler lose there for the first time? We don't know. Idol had the blonde locks, everything. Well, right at the end of the match, Tommy Wildfire Rich comes out from underneath the ring.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the backstory to that is, Bob, he had been in there since about 4:00 in the afternoon. So he had been in there for about 4 to 5 hours. Now, the rumor has it that it was either a case of beer or a 6-pack of beer that he was in there with him. But he comes out, and of course, they double team Lawler. Lawler ends up losing. They shave Lawler's head. And if the stories that Idol told about how the fan, they were afraid to go back to the locker room because they knew what was going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So they waited for things that never died down. They had to get a police escort to get them back to the dressing room because the fans were so livid.
Yes. I think Mayor McCall, his podcast. Mayor John
I know
McCall.
John. Yeah, sure. Uh-huh.
And he told this story too about that particular match. And I think Tommy told him that it was just a 6-pack. I wasn't
could have been
all day. Although I could see why. I mean, imagine laying under there for all that time.
Oh.
My gosh. My gosh.
Yeah. And you just don't see those kind of things anymore.
Had to be a total surprise. And
Memphis,
the fans went bananas.
Memphis was so creative on some of the stuff they did. The empty arena match was creative. Didn't sell any tickets, but it was creative. Here's two guys, Terry Funk and Jerry Lawler and Lance Russell as the announcer and a cameraman, and that's it. An 11,000 empty seat arena.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, the famous Terry Funk line, my eye,
Right. Oh, man. Ooh, you know something? Funk was so good in that match, I felt sorry for him.
You're exactly right.
I mean, when somebody's screaming, "Oh my eye," it's that kind of grabs you. It's like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
But you know what? One of my favorite Lance calls was, not enough people talk about this. There was a time when people didn't go outside the ring and brawl a lot, and they didn't go through tables every match like they do now.
Yeah.
You remember Randy Savage? I think it was Ricky Morton at the Coliseum, put him through a table. I don't know if it was Gibson or Morton. I'm 65, folks. I have, I'm young
there with you.
Coins. There's younger faces on coins at this point. But anyway, that call, that moment when he went through the table, like the table split in half for real, and down he goes.
Right.
I thought it was riveting because it wasn't the type of thing that happened all the time back then. It was, and the crowd went bananas, and everybody was scared that he really got hurt.
Right.
So that was a really, really great moment.
I know I've seen it. I've got to go back and look at that then. Yeah, that's the case. And then the time when Joe LeDuc threw Lawler.
Oh yeah.
From the ring, and he landed on the announce table right in front of my dad. Ended up messing his leg up tremendously. I think he got a really bad hematoma. I mean, the distance where I don't know if you. No,
I've seen the tape. No, I've seen the tape. Yeah,
it was a long way, and he landed right on that table, and I think he landed right on the bell that was right there. But it just messed his leg up bad. Things like that happen, man, especially in Memphis wrestling.
We haven't talked about Jerry Lawler enough. Jerry Lawler. I don't want to hear. Not enough people talk about his athleticism. He wasn't a big muscle guy, and he wasn't a small speed guy.
No.
He was slightly larger than the average guy, but and strong naturally.
Right.
He didn't trade anything harder than steak and eggs. Probably. He was just a natural athlete. And he did so many things in the ring he doesn't get credit for, like those lightning fast punches he used to throw. A moment like that where he allows himself to be tossed into the air, literally, and land like that.
Yeah.
He doesn't get nearly enough credit for his athleticism. Everybody knew he had the charisma and he was great on the mic. Right. But I think he was just as good at acting as those other attributes were.
Yeah. I don't know if people know this about Jerry Lawler, but, Jerry Lawler, he's never had a cigarette, never did drugs, never had alcohol, and never been in a gym. That's what everybody would say about Lawler.
Hey, I know this much. The hardest thing he ever drank was Coca-Cola.
Right.
He loves Coca-Cola. Well, he's a big Coke fan. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. If you go to his house, he's got all Coke.
I have been there.
Oh, have you? Yeah.
Yeah. The week I spent, it was Lawler who invited me to be on the TV show.
Oh.
So he knew I was in town, and we spent 2 or 3 days together, and he took me around, and, I got to see the ballpark and the arena. I got to step in the historic ring, all that stuff.
Yeah.
So he really, and you know what? If he's out there, Jerry, you're the best, man. I'll never forget that week in 91. It was just so much fun, and meeting everybody from Tojo to Jerry Lawler was just incredible.
Yeah. Jerry's a great guy. When I get back to Memphis, I always try to hook up. Jerry and Jerry Calhoun and Dave Brown, they do a lunch every Thursday. So if I'm in town, I give them a call and I try to hook up with them. I want to keep track of those guys, because those guys meant so much to my dad, Bob. They were just, and I don't know if people know the story about how Lawler got into the business. And if you'll bear with me, I'd love to tell it. But Lawler, 15, 16-year-old kid watching wrestling on TV, watching my dad and all the guys. And I think they all know he's a tremendous artist. and he would draw pictures of what he saw on TV. And then he got the great idea. Say, hey, I'm going to send them into Channel 13, attention Lance Russell. So Dad started getting these posters in of and just tremendous artwork. Herb Welch and Don and Al Green and Saul Weingroff and the Von Brauners. And I'm throwing names out if you remember it.
Yeah.
Back in his
listen, dude, I know all this stuff. I was around. Like I said,
yeah.
was
so my dad had a great idea of, hey, I'm going to put these on TV and show them to people and say, hey, look at this fan that we have, a Jerry Lawler, 16 years old, and look at this artwork of what happened, And so one Saturday he gives Jerry a call at home and says, hey, Jerry, we really love this artwork you're doing. He says, we'd love to have you come down to the studio and show your artwork. So Jerry comes down to the studio. Of course, he's just smitten, with everything going on. Couldn't believe Lance Russell called him to begin with, and goes down there, shows his artwork. Dad introduces him to Jackie Fargo, the fabulous Jackie Fargo, often imitated, never duplicated. And the rest is history. I mean, Jackie takes him under his wing, teaches him the business. And I think in 71, is when Lawler first started wrestling.
That sounds about right, yeah.
But he and Jerry, at my dad's funeral, I had Jerry and Dave speak. And Jerry said this many times, but he said, if it wasn't for Lance Russell, there would be no Jerry Lawler. And so I can't thank him enough. And Dave Brown said the exact same thing. If it wasn't for Lance Russell, it would be no Dave Brown, because Dave got, Dad got Dave into the television.
Lance, I don't even know what to say, man. Again, this is such a thrill to be able to talk to his son. It means a lot to me, because it's like I grew to admire the guy so much, and he was so good at what he did. If we can talk for just a second, though, there was a moment in Memphis, I guess around 92, 93, where he went away. He went to the NWA.
He did. Was
it a good decision? Was it worth it? Personally, I don't think the NWA or WCW, whatever they called it, they didn't use him right. I don't think they used him right for 5 minutes, to be honest with you. What's your opinion of what happened, and why did it happen? Was it just an offer he couldn't refuse?
Yeah,
that type of thing.
It was a couple of things, Bob. One, at the time, Memphis was a territory, so he would, Memphis, Nashville, Lexington, Louisville, Evansville. That was kind of the territory.
Mm-hmm.
He realized that wrestling was on a national TV program, and he really wanted to try his hand at going national and just see how it would work and how it would do. The other thing was, you're exactly right, the money was just too good to pass up.
Mm-hmm.
And they paid him well. And the other thing you said was exactly right. They did not use him right at all.
Mm-hmm.
They kept him in the background. They kept him on a 900 number, doing, piddly interviews here and there, but never really put him on TV. Not sure why, but he did it for, 3-4 years, I guess. And
right.
Decided he'd had enough. He was older at the time. He was probably coming up on 70. And my mom was not in the best of health. And I think he realized that he needed to be home with her more.
Mm-hmm.
And they ended up moving down to Florida and living 3 doors down from my wife and I in Pensacola. And we just bonded from then on. And especially when my mom passed away in 14, I got him back involved in wrestling, doing Comic Cons and going to wrestling reunions and things like that. But you're exactly right. They didn't use Dad right in WCW, and it was a shame, but he had to try it. He had to do it.
Yeah. I remember he was the host of one of the syndicated shows. At least he was the host of a show there.
Right.
I don't know how long that lasted, but he was the main guy in that show, and it was still Lance. But I don't think there's ever been a reaction to somebody leaving a show like there was in Memphis when he decided, and he stood up and said, "This is what I'm going to do." I don't think there was a dry eye in the house, to be honest with you.
Right. It again, it was your dad or grandfather leaving you, man. And
Right.
I just don't know how it's going to be, once he leaves. But he had to try it. I had to at least give him that.
Yep. And, I'm hoping it paid off in terms of just his retirement and everything else. Because, we all work to retire eventually.
Right.
And if it made his retirement easier, I think that's great.
It definitely made it a lot easier for him.
No, so there was a silver lining to all that.
Oh, yeah. It was great. And it was, it was right at the end of his career. And, well, although he did come back to Memphis and do some Memphis work there. So
yes, he did. I realized that. But what I loved? I know what I loved when he was really retired. How he would show up every so often. I'll never forget how proud Jerry Lawler was when Lance came to his restaurant on Beale Street. Exactly. And there's the photos of him enjoying the food. And Lawler writes on Facebook or something. He goes, wow, he really loved the meal. And you could tell he was really excited that Jerry loved Lance.
They were.
They were. Yeah. I mean, Jerry, when Lance passed, I didn't saw him that emotional about anything when he described his feelings for his friend. And that's the kind of guy Lance was.
When he died, Bob, it was a really tough time for the Russell family at the time because we had gone up to Memphis because my sister, who was 63 at the time, had been battling cancer. And she had gone into hospice, and we knew this was the end. So we go up there, and Dad, at that time, he was showing signs of some early dementia. He was probably at that time, at that time he was 91. And we're staying at her house, and he ended up falling, got up in the middle of the night, sometime fell, ended up breaking his hip and cracked a bone in his neck, and never woke up. So I took him to the hospital, the emergency room. I got a phone call that my sister died. And then on the day of my sister's funeral, my dad died. And so it was a very tough time, but the outpouring from the wrestling community was tremendous. That was the same time frame as Tom Petty passing away as well. And Dad actually was trending. He would never know what that means, but he was trending on Twitter as Lance Russell passing away.
I believe it.
I tell you, somebody who really took it hard was Jim Cornette. Jim Cornette thought a lot of Dad.
Mm-hmm.
And, talk about interviews, go back to an early Jim Cornette interview with Dad at Memphis.
Yeah.
But, the outpouring was tremendous, Bob, and it was great. But in happier times at the end of his life, and he and I, when they were living close to us, I got him back involved in doing these wrestling reunions. He was this is a great story. The first one was a Comic-Con in Evansville. And the guy called up, Jeffrey Osborne called up and said, hey, I'd love to have your dad come up for a wrestling reunion, a Comic-Con. And I went to Dad. I said, Dad, this is great, man. We can go up to a Comic-Con. And he goes, first off, what's a Comic-Con? So and then he said, Shane, he says, why do I want to go? Nobody will remember me. I've been off TV for so long. Nobody's going to remember me. All those other guys that have been on TV. I said, Dad, you don't understand. I said, so I sat him down. I started showing him YouTube videos. He goes, what's YouTube? And I said, you got to see this. And he couldn't believe everything that he saw. It just brought him back to his early days. And it was just amazing. And we get up to Evansville. Oh my gosh, the line for Lance Russell table, we weren't prepared. We didn't have anything to sell. I mean, people would say, hey, can I get your autograph? How much is it, guys? He goes, how much is it? And Dad looked at me and goes, are we supposed to be charging for autographs? I go, no, not if you don't want to. He goes, heck no, bring them all. Let's sign some pay and whatever they got. Mm-hmm. And that just showed you. I mean, hey, nothing a knock about the guys making their living this way, but Dad couldn't do it. He loved the wrestling fan, and he could not charge anybody to take a picture or sign an autograph. That was just Lance Russell.
You just made a great point. Nobody was a fans guy like the Memphis announcers. There was no caste system between them.
Yeah.
I think that if any fan walked up to either of those guys and go, boy, I really like your work, they would take it as a major compliment. They were those kind of people. It wasn't like, well, you're bothering me right now. Please don't. You know what I'm saying? And it's like they were just, there's the thing. What made it so wonderful is that they were normal.
Yeah.
They weren't characters. They were like people that you'd want to know. And I'm sure that Lance and Dave got invited to many birthdays and social events and functions just for being on the wrestling show. You know what I mean? It's like, is that true? Would people invite them here or there? And
that's exactly true. And Dad tried to attend everything he could. Believe me, Dad appreciated everything that he got in the wrestling business. Number one, he appreciated the fans without a great story here. Dad was probably 89 or 90 at the time, bad back, hurting bad, had to take a lot of pain medicines for that. We go to this wrestling show that Brian Christopher had put on in Memphis. A lot of the guys were there. After the show was over, Dad's hurting. He's feeling bad. And he looked at me, goes, come on, follow me. I go, Dad, what do you mean? Well, you need to sit down and relax and rest. He went out to the front of that building and he wanted to shake every fan's hand that came in. Thank you for coming. I appreciate it. It was amazing. I couldn't believe it.
It's funny. When I went to Memphis, Lance wasn't there, but I will say this. There was no vibe like Memphis wrestling. People like Eddie Marlin, too.
Yeah.
Who, at the end of a big card, he's stacking chairs along with the workers or doing something else to help out. It was like a big Mr. Coffee and people like that. It was like a big cooperative of people who love the business and were willing to do anything to help out.
Right.
And I think I think your dad set that example to an extent, because it's like, it was the same with him. If somebody said, Lance, hey, we need this or that, he probably would have done it no matter what it was.
Exactly right. Yeah. Many a time, I think I've heard that Jimmy Hart was involved in some of the outline shows, setting up the chairs or helping with the ring or doing whatever he needed to help out.
Yeah, I know that, at that point, Eddie was a, I don't know what they call him, the general manager on the TV show at that point in the history of the Federation. But to think that he could go from being that role on television to being anything you guys need, I'm over here.
Right. Exactly right.
I cannot tell you, I don't want to get choked up here. I cannot tell you what it meant to stand in that studio in the shadow of people like your dad and Jerry Lawler and Bill Dundee and just go down the list. It was a great moment. I really mean that. I can't even put it into words. And getting to meet your dad a couple of times, my admiration knows absolutely no bounds for these people. And because of them as people, as much as what they did on television in the arenas. Because you know what? When I told this story on the show, one of my earliest shows, when I left Memphis, I didn't want to go home. I thought I was home. That's how they treated me there. Every one of them.
That's great.
So I don't know what to say other than, man, is not a bigger fan in the United States of America of your dad than I am. I just thought he was the absolute best, both as a person. I know Bill Apter loves him to death. I mean, who didn't? I don't hear a bad word about your dad. That must be kind of cool to have a father that everybody really loved,
Yeah, that's the thing. I've heard that a lot, Bob, and everybody said that. Cornette, Hart, everybody. His dad. I don't think Lance Russell had an enemy out there. He was nice to everybody. He was a gentleman. He was just that kind of guy. And what was? Go ahead, Bob. I'm sorry.
I can't believe I haven't asked this yet. How was he as a dad? It's true. You're probably going to say to that, but yeah, it's like, he's your dad. I'm sure he had kids are kids and, stuff happens. So, but what was he like as a father?
I tell you a funny story. My brother and I were at a show in Jonesboro, Arkansas, a reunion show. People were coming by. And of course, they were giving the old line about it. Hey, Lance, you are the voice of my childhood. I bet we heard that 50 times that whole day. Finally, my brother looks at me. He goes, man, he was the voice of our childhood too, but I don't think it was that great, do you? Because we heard a lot of, hey, take the garbage out, cut that garbage. No, I tell you, Dad was great. I can't tell you I'm a sports fan. I played sports my whole life, and my dad found the time to coach. He coached me in Little League Baseball. He coached me in basketball. He came to all my games. He did everything. He was an avid golfer. He taught me how to play golf. Just everything about him. He found time for family, which was very important to him. He and my mom. So yeah, it was just, he was just, and people say, what was he like when at home? And I thought, well, he was kind of like what you see on TV. He had that great grandfatherly figure, but in other times I heard, my brother and I heard a lot, what in the Sam Hill are you guys doing? Audrey, can we get some help over here?
I can't even imagine that.
Yeah.
And I was talking to Paige Sutherland, who's the daughter of the famous German wrestler Kurt von Hess, right?
Yeah.
And she tells stories about, well, it's a Saturday afternoon. It comes the Wild Samoans and I'm the Giant. We're going to have a barbecue. And I'm like, I can't even imagine what that was like as a kid. How about you? Did wrestlers ever show up at the house every so often?
Yeah, you're reading my mind, because this is exactly what I talked about in Evansville. You got to watch that, because I go into depth on this. But we didn't have a lot of them come over, to be honest with you. I know Bill Dundee came over a couple of times. We had a couple of parties, and he'd come over. He was in town, and not sure if Lawler ever came over or not. But Dad was kind of funny about. I guess exposing me to the business. I don't, you got to know how wrestlers were back in the day. I mean,
I know
it was a different breed, and he was a father first. So yes, he let me come down, but he wouldn't let me get involved with anything. He didn't want me to do anything, get involved in. So he was protecting me, and which I'm kind of thankfully did, but because I went in a whole nother turn, but
right.
But yeah, it was he just I'm trying to the thing about Lawler was the time that I told you I hated him. What changed it was I'd ridden up to Jackson, Tennessee with Dad, and I got in the front seat to come home, and Dad says, "Hey, Shane, you need to get in the back. We're giving a guy a ride home back to Memphis." Well, it was Jerry Lawler. And I'm thinking to myself, oh my God, here's a guy that I hate. He calls my dad banana nose. He speaks disrespectful to everybody. Changed my whole outlook on Lawler. He's just a great guy. We both had a love for music. He was a big Beatles fan. I'm a big Beatles fan. And, we talked about all kind of things. He told me this story about how Dad got him in the business. So from then on, I was a Jerry the King Lawler fan, without a doubt.
Yeah. I still can't believe how accommodating he was. First of all, he invites me on the show. I'd seen him in a couple of East Coast Indies, and we hit it off. We talked a while.
Sure.
And I called him in Memphis and said, "Can I get a press pass to come and see this run you got? I want to go to Arkansas." What's it, Arkansas? I forget. I went to 2 shows.
Jonesboro, Knoxville, and Arkansas, probably.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. And he goes, "Well, if you're coming, come on TV. We'll come up. We'll find something for you to do." And they did. They had a little angle with Leatherface at that point. So, and then he took the time to show me around town, and said, "Let's go out to lunch, and come help me with these 2 kids that want to be wrestlers. Talk them out of it with me, that kind of thing." We had a really nice time throughout the whole week, and I can't believe he was that accommodating with his time. Who the heck am I?
Right. Right.
But he invited me to his home, showed me his Coca-Cola collection, showed me his art. I mean, it was a thrill that most mere mortals didn't get to have in that era,
Yeah.
But here's one last point I want to make to you, talking about how the business was. Even in 91, I'm in the TV station, right? I'm sitting in the room where you would sit and watch a monitor, and then when they need you, they called you, right? But at one point I go, geez, I got to go to the bathroom. I got enough time. I'm not for 45 minutes. So I asked somebody, can you tell me where a men's room is? And they said, you go down the hall into that room, and you'll see a sign that says men. So I go in there and went to the men's room, came out. But there was a section outside of this restroom And everybody knew who I was and why I was there, right? But there's Jerry Jarrett, Eddie Marlin, and the booker Eric Embry talking about what's going to happen on the show. And they see me, and it's like, uh-oh. Right? Hi, guys. I said, and I just kept going. I talked to Jerry later.
Yeah.
But that just goes to show you, even in 1991, they protected the business right down to anybody who might be within earshot of hearing what they were planning.
Right. Right.
That was the mindset back then.
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
They don't do that now.
No.
I really appreciated it. Surprised by it. Because, I've been in other leagues. I've been in and out of locker rooms and stuff like that. This was different. In Memphis, they were still doing it the old school way.
Yeah. Yeah. Dad, growing up, he never said anything to me about the business at all until I got, older and kind of wised up and got smart with it. But even to the day he died, he would tell me stories, behind the scenes, and he'd look at me and go, Shane, you can't tell anybody this. I want to say, Dad, don't worry. It's all out on YouTube anyway. Everybody knows. Don't worry about it.
No, but that was the mindset.
Yeah.
And doggone it, it was better then. I'm sorry. I'm on my soapbox. It was so much better in our day, my friend. I'm sorry. It just was.
Yeah.
You don't have the feeling watching it now that you had back then. Like you said, you mentioned before, somebody jumping off a top rope and 3 guys standing there for 2 minutes waiting to be hit.
Yeah, I just hate it.
Oh, you have to, if there's no suspension of disbelief in a match and it's all like guys showing their athleticism for
right
a cheap woo or something like that.
Right.
It's kind of lost its suspension of disbelief. I don't know how else to put it. When you can fall into a match, watch it on television or in an arena and go, wow, these guys are really getting into it. And you don't know what's going to happen. That's what makes it fun.
Yeah.
To me.
Yeah.
I don't know how you feel.
I agree totally with you. That's the way I feel. I'll tell you one last story. I hope I'm not boring everybody with stories on
you couldn't be boring if you fell asleep right now. So keep right on going.
But it's kind of funny, and to show you what a pro dad was. Again, later in life, probably 89. Again, he knows he's having trouble remembering things, we go to a wrestling match in Tunica, Mississippi. Brian Christopher put this one on too. And on the way down, we're driving down from Memphis, and he's telling me, Shane, I'm really worried about this. I hadn't been in front of fans in a long time and don't know what, not sure how to handle it. And I don't know what to do. And so I go to Lawler and I say, Jerry, I said, look, Dad's really worried about this. I said, he's worried about getting out in front of people with the microphone and all this. And Jerry says, hey, don't worry, Shane. I got him. I'll take care of him. No problem. So they go out there, the spotlight's on him. Dad walks out. He's crunched over because of a bad back. And the announcer, I can't remember who it was starting to talk to Dad. And he gives the mic to Dad. And I'm thinking, oh my God, this is bad. He gives the mic to Dad. And it was just like a light switch went on. And it was his 40-year-old self again. Hello again, everybody. Lance Russell and so right along ringside. And he went, and I'm looking at Lawler, and Lawler's looking at me, and he shrugged his shoulder like, what are you worried about? Look at this guy. Mm-hmm. And he did that time after time. I was so worried about it. You put a microphone in his hand, and again, it was just like a light switch went on, and he was right back in the wrestling announcer mode. Unbelievable.
And everybody loved doing it too.
Oh, just absolutely. He was just beaming when he came back in. How'd I do? It was good. Was it good? I go, yo, God, Dad, it was great. You did great. So
Lance he always did great, my friend. He always did great.
Well, thank you very much. I don't know if you're the number one fan, but behind me, but
I'm way up there, man. I like I said, wrestling was going in the direction in 88, 89 I didn't agree with. And to have Memphis come into my home every week, like I was living in Memphis, It was the best. The best. Capital T, capital H, all the way down that line.
Wow.
And I'm really thrilled that you took the time to speak with me. I know you're a busy guy. Tell the folks what you're up to, or if there's any way that they can get a hold of you, or anything you're doing that you'd like people to know about.
You know, I'm on Facebook, and I follow all the wrestling stuff. So Shane Russell, and I'm in Pensacola, Florida. I love to hook up with anybody who wants to. I love to talk wrestling, and especially Lance Russell. And Bob, I'm not as busy as I used to be, because about 2 months ago I retired. So I'm living the dream right now. So.
Dude, at my age, I have never been this busy. I am swamped. I even started a second podcast recently, so it's like,
oh my gosh,
every moment of every day, man, and nights too. But you know what? I've been that way. I've always been kind of a workaholic type. Yeah. But I gotta get that. I gotta get that work-life balance going a little better, because I am on the move all the time. But I'm just thankful I have the health to do it. You know?
Yeah. My wife, people would ask me, "What are you going to do? What are you going to do while you're retired?" And you just can't sit around. Well, heck, we can't. We don't have enough time in the day, because we have grandkids that we help watch from time to time, and my wife and I are started going back to the Y to keep ourselves in shape. And I'm an avid tennis fan. I love to play tennis. So right before we were talking, I was watching the tennis match, the French Open. So we're keeping busy with all that.
Yeah, I bowl. I've bowled my whole life. So I'm still competitive. 1-300 game, my friend. Just one.
You do have one through, right?
Yeah, I got one. Just one. Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah, I did pretty good for an old fart, That's not too bad.
Folks, are you in leagues and do all that?
Yes. I've bowled in both local tournaments and made a few bucks doing that, and it was fun. I just enjoy it. I like leaving real life for a while and getting lost in the competition, and that's about all I physically can do at my age. So, so other people into the pickleball and all that stuff. It's my scene. So,
well, Bob, again, I can't thank you enough for having me on. Let me talk about Lance Russell and some Memphis wrestling stories. And, again, thank you so much. I hope everybody is listening, had a good time, and love the stories.
I have no doubt they did have a good time, and as much as I did. I can't thank you enough either. And I hope someday, not too far in the future, that we're both at an event together, that I get to shake your hand and thank you again, because it's like, I hope there's some kind of convention or something. We just bend to each other and find each other, because I would really like to talk to you some more. And please come back someday. Could you do that?
Anytime, buddy. You know me. I love talking to Lance Russell and Memphis wrestling. So,
ladies and gentlemen, this is Shane Russell. That's as good as it gets for me. Shane Russell, folks, wonderful guy. Real chip off the old block, because Lance Russell was a wonderful guy too. Just fantastic. I couldn't be happier. And I hope you enjoyed that, even a fifth as much as I enjoyed talking to him. It's like meeting an old friend you never knew. Because you know what? I think Lance Russell was everybody's friend too. He really was. Story about him shaking everybody's hand on the way out of an arena. That's impossible, but that's what he did. Lance Russell, folks, the best of the best of the best. OutdatedWrestlingHour.buzzsprout.com. That is our website. Click it. All of our shows are there. You don't even have to go anywhere else. You don't have to log into an app, but if you want, we're on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and all the major places to get your shows. Write to us at outdatedwrestling@gmail.com. I'm on Facebook. I'm the guy singing with BB King in New York City on my page. I'm still buzzing. I miss Memphis wrestling greatly. Miss the Jarrett promotion. Miss Jerry Jarrett. What can I tell you? Those are the days, my friend, and I hope you agree. We have a lot of really cool shows coming up. Guess who's on the next one? It's the guy I consider to be the second best heel turn of the 80s. I've already had one wag on Facebook make fun of me for that. I don't care. My friggin' show. And I think this guy's heel turn was unbelievable. And for a while, I firmly believe it helped save a territory. So don't miss next week. I'm going to leave the name under my hat. But we're going to have some fun speaking with somebody you may not know, but who turned out to be a really good wrestler and surrounded by really good wrestlers. And including one who was a superstar in the making at that time. So don't miss next week's show. My name is Bob Smith. This is the Outdated Wrestling Hour. I want to thank each and every one of you for being part of this, especially the members of the Outdated Wrestling Hour fan club, which you can learn about on outdatedwrestling.buzzsprout.com. And for a couple of bucks a month, you can help perpetuate this show, as well as our sister program, the Outdated Entertainment Hour. We have a couple of shows in the can already. We have Brian Solomon talking about cartoons and everything under the sun. We have Mark Doble, Canadian music writer, talking about the legacy of the unbelievable Guess Who with Burton Cummings and Randy Bachman and Dominic Torano, all those great players. And we're working on a third one right now, Pete Mancini and What is Americana? Now, Pete's a young artist, but he's going to be a big Americana artist, and we're going to dig into that a little bit and talk about all kinds of things musical, and I think you'll enjoy that. And we're going to have a show coming up talking about B.B. King with one of the men who knew him best. We got some cool stuff coming. So you better come correct, baby. You better be here. You hear me? We got some fun coming your way on both the Outdated Wrestling Hour and the Outdated Entertainment Hour. These shows are a production of Bob Smith Podcasts. Did that sound like Lord Alfred Hayes at all? I hope. Anyway, thanks. Glad to have you here. I'm hoarse, I'm old, and I'm hurting. Until next time, this is Bob Smith, thanking you profusely. And Ringo says it all the time, peace and love. Like Jackie DeShannon sang, what the world needs now is love, sweet love. Yeah. A lot.